Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming to our 22nd Civil Courage Prize event. We are having a slightly different format this year because we're partnering with NYU and have had sponsorship also from Columbia. So our prize giving will be here, and then we'll go upstairs for a larger event, which is the symposium. So this is a smaller ceremony, if you want. I'm very proud to be here as John Train's daughter. He was the founder and creator of this prize. And we have just lost him this summer, so we're very happy that his last vote for a candidate was for someone as impressive as Alexei Navalny, and that he really was aware that this was what we were doing and was thrilled with the expanded approach to this prize. It started as a very small prize, and we're trying to bring out the footprint. We're happy to be partnering with NYU, and and we have Josh here, who is going to make welcoming remarks. And I think there's a community of people in New York who care very much about what the soul of Russia is like today. Of course, we have our wonderful Mikhail Baryshnikov, who is very concerned with how people think about what is Russian, and we're very much supporting that idea that there are positive things to say about everybody, not everybody, but every nationality, and and we can look for heroes everywhere. So in a spirit of gratitude for very many Russians and for my father for having recognized many of them over time, and you'll hear more about this later, I welcome you all and invite Josh up to the podium to make introductory welcoming remarks. Please.
Great. So thank you so much. I just want to welcome all of you here on behalf. My name is Joshua Tucker. I'm the director of the Jordan Center for the Advanced Study of Russia here at NYU. And it's a great, great pleasure for us to be able to host this ceremony today and to welcome all of you here to NYU. We'll be having larger remarks and symposium upstairs after the ceremony is over. But I just wanted to say on behalf of NYU, the Jordan Center, and also the Harriman Institute, who's helping to co-sponsor this as well, it's a great pleasure to have all of you here today and for us to be able to be a part of this important event. So, without further ado, I'll turn it over.
Okay, go ahead.
So you'll hear from all of us later as well. I have the privilege of being the chair of the John Train Civil Courage Prize Award, and it's the Train Foundation. So it's a delight to have you all with us. And my short duty here is to introduce Leonid Volkov, who is both the president of the Anti-Corruption Foundation, which is Alexei Navalny's foundation, as well as his chief of staff. And he's traveled to be with us and to accept the award on Mr. Navalny's behalf. And we're delighted you're here. And Leonid, I'm going to let you come up and speak. We're going to have more chance to hear from Leonid and Maria, the chief investigator of the Anti-Corruption Foundation, at the full symposium after this. This is really just a more intimate award ceremony. So Leonid.
Thank you so much. Dear Musa, trustees of the Train Foundation, and everyone here, it's a great honor and privilege, which I don't deserve. Well, Alexei Navalny deserves it, but I have to do it on his behalf. And first of all, we don't have a lot of possibilities to be in touch with him these days. In the last 2 months, actually, Russian government tries to restrict his communication with the outer world, and we kind of only see the penal colony where he is like every day, just to see him in court every day to make sure he's alive, and that's pretty much the only way how we can communicate with him now. But still, he sends his regards, and he's really very thankful, very grateful to accept this award. This means a lot, really, for him, because it's called the Civil Courage Prize, and this is actually, I believe, a very proper description of the very personality of who is Alexei Navalny. He's, first of all, a very courageous man, and the situation is that he kind of like proves his courage every day. For more than 2 months, he spends his days in a punishment cell, which is 7 by 11 feet large. I'm not very familiar with your measurement system, so I double check. 7 by 11 feet, so it's really pretty much twice the size of this table, maybe slightly more. And so his every day now is really an exercise in, well, civil courage. He doesn't only stay strong there, he doesn't only keeps his spirit high, but he also educates us by example and leads us by example. Us, I mean the whole organization, the Anti-Corruption Foundation, that he has founded 11 years ago, and which is the leading Russian political NGO which fights against Putin, against his corruption, against his war, but also, I dare say, everyone, the outer world. Because one of the most important messages that he brings to us, the thing that he repeats like very often, is when he speaks to us, to his colleagues, he uses his days in court for this. Like, whatever they do to me, whatever the conditions are, doesn't matter. You have to do what you have to do. We have our plans, we have our projects, we have our investigations ongoing. Don't give them the leverage. Don't allow them to leverage like my conditions, the punishment, all these enormous things that they're doing to him. Don't allow them to use it as a leverage. Do what you have to do. It was very clear that they were trying to punish him for the fact that he returned back to Russia, that he dared to survive the poisoning, that he dared to investigate Putin's corruption and show his palace, that he continued to speak up even while behind bars for almost 2 years now, and he continued to do so also when Putin started his war. Despite being behind bars, Alexei Navalny was probably the most vocal and loud voice against the war from the very first day. And that's also very important, of course. And for us, for his team, for the Anti-Corruption Foundation, it's always a source of inspiration and of leadership. But my message today is, let us all learn from him, and let this be a source of inspiration and leadership for the whole world. Because, well, what's happening now in the world? Well, Putin is blackmailing everyone with a nuclear threat. Putin is trying to force Ukraine into negotiations by talking about tactical nuclear weapons, dirty bombs and so on. And he also is trying to force the European leaders, the Western leaders, to reconsider their support for Ukraine, their position with regard to this war, based on these or that threats that he delivers. Like, it has been a hunger blackmail in June, July this year, when he tried to force like a hunger in Northern Africa. Then it has been a gas blackmail, and like October, in August and September, when he tried to force Europe into negotiations by like cutting off the gas supplies, and now finally, probably the ultimate attempt is the nuclear blackmail. The lesson that we learn from Alexei, from a single man, there in a small cell, far away, like 200 miles to the east from Moscow, is do what you have to do, no matter what they do during Kremlin. That's the only way to deal with them. That's the only way to win the fight against them at the end of the day. And this is, of course, the existential fight now for the world, the fight that has to be won. This is something that motivates us to keep going, to keep doing what we have to do, and we believe that the event like this, the prize like this is something that will help to amplify Alexei's message to the whole world. Keep doing the great job. Everyone has to do what they can do best under the current circumstances. Like the Anti-Corruption Foundation found itself on February 24th, when the war has started, with a unique media opportunity, with like almost 10 million subscribers on social media, which were not a God-given gift, which were the result of 11 years of tremendous work that Alexei Navalny and his team and his investigators and everyone were doing during the last 11 years. So we managed to win this audience. So, okay, we realized this will be our contribution for the worldwide anti-Putin fight and anti-Putin campaign. We started to broadcast counter-propaganda, political news, the truth. We started telling truth to Russian people using this opportunity, our media channel, that we happened to have on February 24th. Ukrainians are fighting on the military fronts of the war. Europeans are dealing with like enormous prices for natural resources. Still, they are sending like money and weapons to Ukraine, and so do Americans, Britons, and other nations of the free world. This is a way to deal with this crisis. This is the way to deal with this evil. Like, let everyone do what they can best achieve and best do in their corresponding positions and situations. So I believe this is the lesson and the message from Alexei Navalny today, and thank you so much for listening to this, and thank you so much for helping to spread this message.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Ariadne Calvo-Platero. I'm president of the Civil Courage Prize, and in all the time that I have been involved with the Civil Courage Prize, we have never intentionally given the prize to someone who hasn't been able to attend. And as you know, and I know we've been talking to you for a while, it's with great sadness that we, of course, cannot give it to Alexei Navalny in person. But it became increasingly clear to us over the last year and even 18 months that it was essential that we gave him the prize this year, and that we would have to give it to him in absentia. So thank you for coming, and we would like you to take this on his behalf, and hopefully at some point be able to hand it to him.
Thank you so much. In our office in Vilnius, in the office of the Anti-Corruption Foundation, we have quite a shelf with many prizes that Alexei Navalny has collected in the last 18 months and that are waiting for him. Among them, there is a saber from Poland, which we probably can use one time. So, but this medal will also, of course, take its place on the shelf, but hopefully for not too long.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone.
and welcome. We really appreciate your all being with us tonight. I'm George Biddle, and I have the privilege of chairing the Civil Courage Prize. Before we get into any of the details of the evening, I do want to really express our tremendous appreciation to the Jordan Center for the Advanced Study for Russia and their director, Professor Joshua Tucker. Josh, are you out there? Because you're going to be coming up to speak just afterwards, so thank you. And then before I speak about the prize and the really truly incredible laureate this year, I'd like to pay tribute to the prize's founder and chairman, John Train. We're going to show a picture of John, I hope, if we have it. We just lost John in August. He established this prize. He was our leader, our guide, our colleague, and he was a really good friend. He was a man of remarkably wide-ranging talents and interests, and at his core, John was truly an intellectual, a deep thinker, and a concerned global citizen. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to travel with John on a number of occasions, and he was proud to let anyone who got to know him well know that he had visited over 140 countries during his lifetime. His travels informed him and motivated him. It was a combination of his concern for his fellow global citizens and the inspiration he drew from the unique bravery of some of those citizens that John decided to establish the Civil Courage Prize. John was moved by the great Soviet dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and it was out of his friendship with and his admiration for Solzhenitsyn that John began to think about the term civil courage. Solzhenitsyn had single-handedly stood up to the totalitarian Soviet regime at great personal risk. To John, Solzhenitsyn exemplified civil courage. His valor was not on the battlefield, but in a brutal, repressive society as a sole, valiant actor, fighting. To honor Solzhenitsyn and others who would follow his path, John established the Civil Courage Prize and endowed it through the Train Foundation. The Civil Courage Prize has been given annually for the past 22 years to an individual or group who demonstrate steadfast resistance to evil at great personal risk. John had an extraordinary vision for the prize, and we have a truly extraordinary laureate this evening, Alexei Navalny. It is hard to imagine an individual who epitomizes the qualities of the Civil Courage Prize more than Alexei Navalny. Like Solzhenitsyn, he has single-handedly stood up to his government and challenged it to be less corrupt, less violent, and more open. In doing so, he has inspired so many, but he has also done so at unimaginable personal risk. I honestly don't think many of us in this room can fathom the exceptional bravery that he honestly possesses. For his actions, he has been severely poisoned. He nearly died and is now being held, and we'll hear from his colleagues, in solitary confinement at a maximum security gulag. And why? Because he chose to return to his country. This is civil courage on a truly astonishing scale. We're so pleased that Mr. Navalny's remarkable colleagues are with us tonight, Leonid Volkov, his chief of staff and the president of his Anti-Corruption Foundation, and Maria Pevchikh, his chief investigator of the Anti-Corruption Foundation. We're going to hear from them at length later in the evening. So now I want to turn it over to Josh, and later in the evening, again, we'll hear from our colleagues, and I want to thank you all for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much. Good evening. My name is Joshua Tucker. I'm a professor of politics here at NYU and also the director of the Jordan Center for the Advanced Study of Russia. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you here today on behalf of the Train Foundation, the Jordan Center for the Advanced Study of Russia, the Harriman Institute at Columbia, and New York University, for what I am sure will be a wonderful symposium in honor of the 2022 Civic Courage Prize Award winner, Alexei Navalny. It is, of course, deeply troubling that Alexei cannot be here tonight to receive this award in person, but it is also deeply encouraging and it is uplifting that people here today have gathered to keep his struggle alive, to keep what he stands for in the public domain, to not let him be silenced despite the efforts of the Russian regime to do exactly that. Before we get started, I would just like to thank Sasha Shpitalnik, the Jordan Center Program Administrator. While I will leave it to the Train Foundation to thank the people who worked on the event on their end later, I do want to note that absolutely none of this would have happened tonight on the NYU side without Sasha's hard work and determination to make this event happen. And without further ado, I'm going to begin by introducing our first speaker, who I have the great privilege to be introducing today. Born in 1948 in Riga, Latvia, Mikhail Baryshnikov is considered one of the greatest dancers of our time. After commencing a spectacular career with the Kirov Ballet in Leningrad, he came to the West in 1974, settling in New York City as the principal dancer of the American Ballet Theater. In 1978, he joined the New York City Ballet, where he worked with George Balanchine and Jerome Robbins. A year later, he was appointed artistic director of ABT, where, for the next decade, he introduced a new generation of dancers and choreographers. From 1990 to 2002, Mr. Baryshnikov was director and dancer of the White Oak Dance Project, where he and choreographer Mark Morris co-founded to expand the repertoire and visibility of American modern dance. As an actor, he's performed widely on and off Broadway, as well as in television and film, receiving a Tony Award nomination and a Drama Desk Award for Metamorphosis, and an Academy Award nomination for The Turning Point. He is currently working with director Igor Golyak and the Arlekin Players Theater on a new adaptation of Chekhov's masterpiece, The Cherry Orchard, to premiere this summer, to which I'm sure we are all looking forward. In 2005, he launched the Baryshnikov Arts Center in New York City, a creative space designed to support multidisciplinary artists from around the globe. Among Mr. Baryshnikov's many awards, and I'm not going to mention all of them, but among many of them are the Kennedy Center Honors, the National Medal of Arts, the Commonwealth Award, the Chubb Fellowship, the Jerome Robbins Award, the Vilsack Award, and in 2010 he was given the rank of Officer of the French Legion of Honor. In the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, in an effort to do something to counter the destruction and bloodshed, Baryshnikov joined with the writer Boris Akunin and a good friend of mine and the economist Sergei Guriev to found True Russia. Headed up by managing director Oleg Radzinski, this charity helps those affected by Putin's war and unites peoples of Russian culture around the world in their will to support the victims of the military aggression. Their mission is simple. Even though they cannot stop the war, they can and want to help its victims, first and foremost Ukrainian refugees. They also support Russian refugees, those who did not wish to stay in Putin's Russia or had to flee from political persecution. They will continue their humanitarian mission until Russia is a democratic society living in peaceful dialogue with other nations. True Russia is not a political movement and not affiliated with any party or politician. True Russia's first move was to support the efforts of the Disasters Emergency Committee in helping Ukrainians fleeing the war zone. Over £1 million was raised in the first 3 months, with 100% of these funds helped the work by the DEC charities and their local partners in Ukraine and in neighboring countries, meeting people's immediate and longer-term needs. I do want to close by noting, from a personal perspective, that in my house, growing up with a mother who loves the ballet and is here tonight, there was only one dancer whose name I ever learned, and it was Mikhail Baryshnikov, because of how much he was talked about in our home. To me, being a ballet dancer meant being Mikhail Baryshnikov. To be sharing a stage with him tonight is such a great honor, and I hope you will all join me in giving him a very warm welcome.
Good evening. Thank you, Professor Tucker. And thank you to the trustees of the Civil Courage Prize for inviting me to be a part of honoring Alexei Navalny this evening for his historic fight for human rights in Russia. Like all of you, I believe I am in awe of Navalny's courage, his efforts to champion a more democratic vision for Russia are selfless and shocking and insanely brave, of course. I recently overheard a conversation where one person said, Navalny should have stayed in Europe, in Germany, and not returned to Russia. Another person answered, you don't understand. He could not go. After some thought, I realized that this was true. Alexei Navalny could not go. He's consumed by the idea that Russia and its people can and will survive yet another brutal authoritarian government. He believes in Russia when nearly nobody else does. And how to say it? And I have no better explanation for this other than to say that he loves Russia and its people more than anything else. It's love that demands selfless courage. And I think only a truly extraordinary individual can hold such a love. Navalny often speaks of what he calls the beautiful Russia of the future. His optimism and love inspires us, compels us to embrace his daring idea that Russians themselves can choose a different path if they truly given the chance to do so. It takes courage to believe this. It takes courage even to dream about this. But Alexei Navalny's extraordinary courage is a beacon. This beacon can light the way to the idea of a beautiful Russia of the future. Thank you, Alexei Navalny. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming here. Thank you.
We're going to dim the lights and we're going to see 3 video clips. The first is for those of you who have not had the chance to see the documentary on Alexei Navalny called Navalny, produced by Warner Brothers, CNN Films, and HBO Max. It's a must. It's an incredibly powerful portrait of a brave individual. Secondly, after that, we're going to see an interview with Ambassador Michael McFaul, the former ambassador to Russia, speaking about Mr. Navalny. And lastly, you'll see the last clip from the actual documentary with Mr. Navalny speaking to all of us, but really to everyone who's had a chance to see that movie. When that ends, on stage will be Gillian Tett from the Financial Times, who we're delighted is with us tonight, and Leonid and Maria, who I mentioned earlier, in conversation about their work and their friendship and partnership with Mr. Navalny. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Mike McFaul, for speaking to us. You were ambassador in Russia and continue to focus on the region as a professor at Stanford and public commentator. We're very interested in your perspective on Alexei Navalny as well as Russia in general. But today I'm talking to you because the Civil Courage Prize is awarding him a prize for fighting evil above and beyond the normal course of one's civic duties. In Navalny's case, his original focus was corruption, fighting corruption in Russia, which led to assassination attempts and now has made him the most visible opposition figure in Russia. So he's now sitting in a maximum security prison and yet is managing to have amazing forward-looking op-eds published in the Washington Post, which is somewhat surprising to us.
Yes.
To understand that. He seems to have an unstoppable drive to keep fighting for change, no matter what the personal cost. He's truly an example of courage. What keeps him coming back to Russia to try and change things?
Alexei Navalny is one of, if not the most courageous person I've ever met, I've ever known. He has a drive to save his country, to serve his country, that is something unique and something that should be admired and should be acknowledged. So thank you for this event today. But he decided, and I was communicating with him, by the way, right before he decided to go back, he decided it's my country. I'm not going to be chased out of my own country. And he was ready to live with the circumstances. I think he knew very well what he was flying back to. The only thing on his mind in doing that was not about his personal safety. It was about how it would affect his family. By going back, he has defied his critics and his jailers, and to say, I am not afraid. They didn't expect him to come back. Second, as you noted, he continues to be active. He meets with his lawyers and gets materials out and publishes things. Kind of amazing to me. Number three, he decided to go back, but I know in conversation with some of his colleagues, he very explicitly said for them to leave. And also for him, it was a moral choice that he didn't, as he told me, I don't really have a choice here, Mike. There would not be a way for me to live with myself had I left my country. To remobilize opposition to the regime there. Nobody likes what people, everybody's offended by corruption, right? That's a universal thing. What has been amazing about Alexei Navalny is just how adept and smart and creative he has been in exposing corruption. I think it's the Achilles heel of the Russian regime today. Alexei Navalny is not a saint. He's said some things that he regrets in the past. He's human. But I do think he has now played that role. There's nobody else like him in terms of a single opposition leader that people focus on. And I think appropriately so, given the work that he's done before and the work he continues to do from jail. Regarding support, don't forget him. What we're doing right now is what we need to do. He comes and goes, writes op-eds, put on Twitter, but then there are days when the world has forgotten about him. And I know that that's hard. So don't forget, he's in jail. Those that count the days he's in jail, retweet them, remind the world he's still in jail. Number two, I would say distinguish between Putin and his regime and Russians. Yeah. Whenever I hear on TV people talking about Russia thinks this, Russia wants that, Russia believes this, I want to ask, who is this Russia that you've met? Navalny's just as Russian as Vladimir Putin. And I think helping to remind people that there are many Russians with different points of view is also a way to help him.
Wonderful. Well, you have said so much, so concisely and so eloquently. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, is this working? Great.
No.
You need to switch on the microphones. Well, hello everyone. My name is Gillian Tet. I'm with the Financial Times. I'm delighted to be here tonight to honour the extraordinary courage of Alexei Navalny, which, as you've just seen, frankly should challenge and humble us all. But we should also remember that there are other people behind his ogromная sila, behind the great strength of the movement, who are also very courageous and taking great risks. And we have two of them on the platform with us tonight. Leonid Volkov, who was previously a politician in Yekaterinburg, in the Duma, in the parliament there, and is now Chief of Staff of the Navalny Foundation. and Maria Pevchikh, who is an investigative journalist, activist, who's now running the anti-corruption work and investigation work of the Navalny Foundation. Two individuals who have also been remarkably brave and frankly deserve to be honoured and commended and saluted for the sacrifices that they've made. And frankly, I should mention the sacrifices that all Russian activists today are making right now. It takes extraordinary courage to stand up against the Putin regime. And there are many people who are never heard of, but have also taken very bold decisions. So perhaps I can start with you, Maria, and ask, so how is Alexei right now? We've heard that he's been in solitary confinement in a maximum security prison. He has had his jail sentence extended already. There are now discussions about having new charges against him, and that could potentially extend his jail sentence to 30 years. How is he physically and mentally and emotionally?
Well, the honest and truthful answer to this would be, we don't really know. We have lost our ability to communicate with Navalny directly about 2 months ago.
It coincided with escalation in Ukraine in terms of the war. And I think these two things are connected in a way. About 2 months ago, Navalny was completely silent through a range of illegal actions taken against him. His attorney-client privilege was waived, and he ended up spending his entire time in a punishment cell, in a solitary confinement unit, a very small room, 7 by 11 feet, where he is on his own, and all he has in his life at the moment is one book. He's allowed only one book per term, and a mug. That's his entire possessions. That's all he has. At 6 a.m. every morning, his bed is being chained up to the wall. So he's not allowed to sit in it, he's not allowed to lay down, he's not allowed to have any rest. So he has to sit on a small stool without a back. He has a small little table there, and for 35 minutes a day, he's allowed to use pen and paper. So that's the most valuable 35 minutes that we have, because this is how we find out what he's up to, how he's feeling, and what the situation is. In terms of his health, sadly, I don't have any good information either, but let's just think together. He has gone through something that not many people have survived. I'm talking about chemical weapons poisoning. There is no information, there are no studies on how people recover from that, and do they recover at all. He had very bad problems with his back, associated with this poisoning, and let's state the obvious, spending 16 hours a day sitting on a stool in a solitary confinement isn't helping his health.
Terrible. Before I turn to Leonid and ask about the political situation, how do you, as a foundation, communicate with him? How did you get that op-ed that was published in the Washington Post? And if any of you have not seen it, I do strongly recommend you look at it, because it's a remarkable op-ed. But how did that come out of the prison?
It was written before those restrictions were imposed.
Right.
So this op-ed won't be possible today.
Right. That's very, very sobering indeed. I'd like to ask you, Leonid, because you are looking very much at the political environment. How much support do you think there is for Navalny today in Russia? When the Putin's Palace documentary was released, just after he returned to Russia, it was the most viewed piece of Russian language content in the whole of that year, which suggests that a lot of people inside Russia are interested in what Navalny's doing and saying. But do you think that support is now there for Navalny, given the type of nationalism and anti-West rhetoric we're hearing?
Define support. In in a democracy, there are ways to measure support. There are polls and there are elections. Kremlin did a mistake once when they allowed Alexei to run for an election. It was the 2013 Moscow mayoral campaign, because they measured the support and it was like 3%. And their idea was, okay, so we allow him to run, so we see that his support is actually 3%. And they allowed him to run a campaign, to talk to people, to meet people, to answer their questions. He ended up with 35%. So, and like Kremlin had to do some small night miracles and manipulations actually to avoid the runoff, which he probably would win. And after that, they never did this mistake anymore. They never allowed him to be part of a electoral campaign, never allowed him to be on the ballot. So if you now ask, like if you now try to do some polling, like would you vote for Navalny if we would have an election next Sunday, the outcome would probably not very optimistic. I think it end up with like somewhere between 12 and 15%, which is still 20 million people, by the way. And they would say, okay, but Putin has much more. Like, Putin would probably poll around 50 or 55. So, and many would come to a conclusion. So Putin is still legitimate, he's a leader and so on. But then, why is he so scared of him? Why new charges are piling against Navalny? Why Putin never calls his name? Because he knows if there would be like real contest, a competition, fair competition, something even close to fair competition, Navalny would actually win.
Right.
If Navalny would be on the ballot and if we would have an election in Russia now, given all the circumstances, we would win. Because we know how to campaign, we know how to talk to young people, we have ideas. Putin doesn't have anything to offer, anything but fear. That's the only management tool that still remains available for Putin. Fear.
Right.
That's the only thing he has.
Right. Now, you certainly the remarkable audience that looked at Putin's palace, which if any of you have not seen it, I recommend. It's an extraordinary documentary which details the corruption, which Maria worked extremely hard on with colleagues, details the corruption of Putin, and as I say, the extraordinary viewership it had in Russia, I think blew away most people and indicated that underneath the surface support for Putin, there are certainly many people who are eager to know about alternatives. But I'm curious, you have recently at the foundation said that you think that the mobilization, the so-called partial mobilization in Russia, and the war in Ukraine means that actually you have a moment to start building more support and will be going forward to try and campaign actively in an underground manner in the coming weeks and months. Can you tell us a bit about why you think the war in Ukraine is creating an opportunity for you and what you plan to do?
Indeed. So, this is a sad truth that we have to admit, that the invasion of Ukraine, the invasion to Ukraine of February 24th, still didn't really like shake the foundations of Russian society, the foundations of the unwritten social contracts that Putin concluded with a sleeping political majority like 20 years ago. You don't ask questions, you don't ask about corruption, you don't ask about this and that, but we provide you with some decent quality of life, and you don't interfere with political life. This was the contract with the TV audience, like concluded 20 years ago. It was not really shaken on February 24th because it was still a special military operation where some specially trained military people are taking part and so on. But the mobilization, which is of course not partial, it's a complete mobilization, actually designated the end of this social contract. It exists no more. So Putin has brought war to every family, to every house in the country. So for us as a political organization, and we are like the leading political force of the Russian opposition, it's a unique moment which we have to use just to talk to these people that are finally asking questions. Finally, too late, we have to admit this. But better late than never. What's going on? Why we are at war? Where are they taking my brother, father, son, and so on? We have to be nearby to explain, to be faster, to talk to them better than propaganda does, to explain who is actually to blame for this situation, what's actually happening. And that's why not only we have our YouTube channel and other means of communication, but we decided to recreate local support groups which would work locally in Russian regions to talk to people to answer these questions.
I mean, that must be extraordinarily dangerous.
I have a little anecdote, a hopeful anecdote. It's very short to add to Leonid's point. A friend of mine, who most of you would know, his name is Christo Grozov, he's the head of Bellingcat, has this little hope. Like ages ago, he has written a script that monitors Russian Google requests. So there is an equivalent of Google, it's called Yandex. And Bellingcat collects data on what people are looking for. So on the second day of mobilization, guess what the most popular request was?
How do I escape?
You would think. It was, that was, I don't know, top 5 would be, I don't know, how do I break my own leg? How do I avoid mobilization? But among top 3 was a search phrase that went, when are the next presidential elections?
Wow, that's amazing. That indeed is quite remarkable and hopeful.
Even under this absolutely vast and enormous propaganda, those people managed to connect the dots and to at least make the small connection. All right, when is the next chance for me to change it?
Right. I mean, it's worth saying that one of the remarkable things that's happened is that YouTube has stayed working in Russia with the support, if not encouragement, of the American government, and YouTube is being used to disseminate a lot of your content to the Russian population, isn't it? One of the things that is absolutely remarkable about what you're doing to try and campaign is not just a campaign in a traditional political way, but to do the anti-corruption investigations and to try and show Russians just how corrupt and twisted the regime is. Now, I mentioned Putin's Palace before, which was a remarkable documentary detailing all the corruption behind Putin, but you're doing lots of very clever, quick hits, tapping into social media as well. Maria, do you want to tell us what you did recently with Peskov's son? Because I'd imagine probably most people in the audience don't know about this. Peskov is the spokesman for Putin, and you did something very, very clever, which is indicative of your strategy with Peskov's son.
It was on day 1 of mobilization, so panic everywhere. So there was nothing was clear apart from the fact that the entire country is scared, male, female, everybody, young, old. It was just pure and utter panic. And one of our anchors, who we do news live, so while being live in the studio, he called Peskov's son, who is about 30 years old, maybe 32, so exactly the age they mobilize. And also, he served in the Russian army, so that makes him kind of double or triple qualified. He should have been in the first draft. Well, to be fair, he should have been mobilized even before, but on the day we decided, okay, well, he meets every criteria. We should call him and ask whether he's going to go to Ukraine and fight for what his father is advocating for. And he picked up. He's not the brightest tool in the shed.
Random phone call, you pick it up, obviously, in a country that's got repressive regime and political conflict. Yes.
And our news anchor says, "Oh, hello, this is the military unit's number, this and that. We are calling to notify you that you need to show up tomorrow at a certain hour and confirm your mobilization status. Please bring your passport." But don't do this, doing the spiel. And then Peskov's son, instead of hanging up, there was always that option. Instead of hanging up, he says, "Oh, do you know who you're talking to?" And our news guy being completely calm about it. He says, yes, I know your name is Nikolai Peskov, born on this and this date, I'm perfectly aware. But you should still show up and just confirm your status. You just need to, fill in a couple of forms and that's all. And then Peskov's son goes, of course, saying, well, there is like a route for everybody, and I'm going to use a different route. We're going to discuss that at a different level. He goes, and then that was, a couple of more minutes of that, essentially of Peskov saying, there are rules, they are for everybody, but for me, as son of Putin's spokesperson, it's not even that, influential.
Yeah.
He said, no, but I have a separate set of rules. And to this date, we have not seen a son of a Russian government official or a member of parliament of any level actually going and doing the very same thing that they are forcing everybody else to do.
Right. I must say, one of the remarkable things about your foundation is the degree to which you're using very clever OSINT, open source intelligent information to support your investigations, extraordinary data mining, sometimes in parallel with groups like Bellingcat that have got an incredible investigation up right now about the Russians who've actually been programming the missiles to hit the Ukrainian cities. So there's a remarkable wealth of information that you're gathering. How easy is it, apart from YouTube, for you to get it out to the Russian public? And do you see any sign that that is actually bolstering support for Alexei or helping to change minds?
I don't have a good answer to that. So YouTube is still there. God knows why. I think, there are rumors that Kremlin did some polling of their own. I don't know whether Leonid would believe that or not, and the numbers return saying that so many people use YouTube for non-political reasons. The most watched movie on YouTube in Russian throughout the entire time is a cartoon about a bear and a little girl called Masha, and this is why most of people use YouTube. They just loop the video and play it for their kids on iPads, etc., etc., etc. So perhaps the results of those polls came, saying that it's better, or you're better off not annoying people any further. Just keep the cartoons, keep the cooking shows, keep the reality shows, keep the YouTube open, because it's not possible to block one video on YouTube. You have to block the whole platform. So that's the trick. So we are pretty good on YouTube. Our news show every night is being watched from 20,000 people at the same time, so live audience, to, on a big day, 60, 70, 100,000 people sometimes watch us online, and we have about 20 million views per month, so that our audience is pretty big. But we are as comfortable as we feel online. Obviously there is this huge gap which we aren't yet capable to fill in, and this is the offline work. And to do the offline work, this is probably where I need to pass work to Leonid, because that's his realm and his universe, our offline stuff.
Yeah, tell us.
So first of all, I agree. They don't block YouTube because of this gap. Because YouTube's audience is 80 to 100 million people, while only 20 million of them use it primarily as a source of political information. So they don't want to alienate the 60 to 80 million people who use it for cartoons or for recreation of any kind. At some point of time, they might decide to change their behavior, but so far as we have this opportunity, we try our best to use it. But of course, it's still enormously important to talk to people, not only using online tools, but also physically. And that's why actually we always tried to do something like this, to engage in local political campaigns, to talk to people on the ground. During Navalny's presidential campaign, when he was never allowed to be on the ballot, Still, he uses the campaign as an opportunity to build a network of 45 regional offices, which became like such consolidation points for all types of local activism, not only political, like eco and human rights and like whatever. Like local groups that were advocating for something, news that they could come to local Navalny office in their small city and get support, get munition, like experience, training, like how to advocate, how to run their campaign, how to make it more visible and more efficient, and so on. So it is not a coincidence, I believe, that Putin actually developed like enormous pressure against our network of regional organizations in 2021, so on the eve of his war against Ukraine, because actually he wanted to make sure that there are no such like physical like centers of consolidation of independent political activity left in the country. He was successful to some extent. We had to formally dismiss our regional offices and to like shut them down, because otherwise it would be just too dangerous for the employees to work there when we have been declared an extremist and terrorist organization. But the truth is that people are still there. Yes. So during our work, during our campaigns, hundreds of thousands of like young people, volunteers, used to work with us, get educated, get experienced, learn like how to campaign, how to work, how to do grassroots work and campaigns. And now, like rebuilding our network in a form of like conspirative organization, we actually try to encourage them to keep applying this knowledge, to use it, like to do local campaigns, to talk to their like relatives, friends, neighbors, and so on. Once again, to answer the questions, to explain what's happening, to expand our influence, and to undermine Putin's base.
So it's basically the kind of democratic mobilization that's well known in America, building for the future, and extraordinarily brave to be doing this in the current circumstances. I'm sure a lot of you have questions, so we're going to move now into the question and answer section of the program. George Biddle is going to come up and oversee the Q&A part of it, so I'm going to give you the microphone now, and do please ask your questions and realize just the degree of personal courage that's involved right across the group in terms of trying to promote this extraordinary campaign.
Thank you, Jillian. So we are open to questions. Are we going to have the questioners come up to a microphone, or do they just want to? So anyone who would like to come up and ask a question, you should not be shy. You've got it. Okay. Okay. Perfect. Right there. Right there. See the hand up?
Thank you so much. Incredible courage. It blows us away, frankly. Are the two of you ever able to set foot in Russia, or if you did, would you like Navalny to be incarcerated immediately?
Well, I have 10 criminal charges against me, while Navalny only has 7. So.
Well, I'm a newbie. I only have 2, so that's. Yeah, so I mean, the serious answer is yes, we will immediately be arrested and sentenced to something around 15 years probably for working for an extremist organization, then another 10 to 12 for discreditation of the military Russian troops, then another 10, yeah, I mean, yeah.
My best is the inclination of minors to participate in terrorist activities.
First of all, thank you for your work, and thank you for your latest investigation about Volkov, who doesn't know is the Minister of Something Health. Let's say, my question is, we all seen what happened with the Putin's yacht. Do we see the same actions being done by European Parliament, European consulate, any action being taken right now? Because Yacht was arrested basically 1, 2, 3, and we see so many houses, almost palaces, that she and her family has in Europe.
Yes, this is a huge part of my work. So when investigative journalists stop and publish, we don't. We continue the legal side of work. I'm just giving a little bit of context. So our lawyers go line by line through our investigations, looking, the breaches of legislations, places where they could complain, etc., etc. So obviously, with the gentleman is referring to our recent investigation about Tatiana Golikova. She's the vice prime minister of Russia, and weirdly, she's not sanctioned. Her colleagues are, the people are much below her in terms of the rank. They are sanctioned, and she's not. And she, of course, the person she's the minister being responsible for fighting poverty. And we found 3 villas in Portugal, 1 villa worth 20 million euros in Spain, another 20 million euros hotel in Côte d'Azur in south of France, you name it, and then private planes, that's the minister responsible for fighting poverty. I guess her own. That's right, she has definitely won. So just today, I was talking to CNN Portugal. They are, little spoiler alert, they're building a little bit on top of what we have investigated in Portugal. And they have done quite some digging on their own. And part of that big interview that I was giving them today was about Portugal government having an obligation to do something about it. Not to wait for the European Union to pass, Council of Europe or European Commission, and in fact, to pass a new list of sanctions. No, every country can do it. And Putin's yacht that you're referring to, it hasn't been arrested by the EU, it has been arrested by the Italians. So that almost needs to happen on national level, and we spend a lot of time advocating and asking and urging those governments to just, man up and say, okay, well, this is the nominee shareholder I need to impose sanctions against, and that will let me freeze this asset, and I will win time. I will win a couple of months to do proper research, proper investigation, proper judicial action, and then eventually confiscate it, freeze it, whatever the law allows to do.
One in the back and one right here in the second, third row here on the left. And one over there. We've got 3 questions. I'll give this because I'm right here, so I'll give this to them. I'll get this back.
Like everyone, I'm very, very grateful to your incredible reporting and courage and the voice you have in Russia. What, in your opinion, how should the West react to all of the Russians who are leaving the country?
I believe we have actually different opinions, me and Maria.
Well, we did have an argument.
And that's okay. We are a democratic organization, so we are not united on all possible positions here. But first of all, the Russians who are living now, trying to avoid mobilization, they are doing a good thing. So basically, they have to be supported. They are creating logistical nightmare for the Ministry of Defense. There is a lot of logistical nightmare already, and they are increasing it. So that's a good thing. They don't want to kill Ukrainians. That's a very good thing. They don't want to die. That's at least explainable. So instead of saying let them stay in the country, why don't they overthrow Putin and so on, which is a bit naive. Putin is not sending his riot police to the front lines, and he has twice as much riot police per capita as Lukashenko has, the people who held the title of the bloodiest dictator in Europe before 2015. So Putin has all his repression apparatus in place. He's very ready to like to meet all like political street protests, street rallies, and so on. So it would be kind of like quite naive to demand that like people who just like could be forced to stay in the country will be able just to overthrow the government. To win the fight against Putin demands much more, like pressure from all possible sides. Ukrainian military victories and like more weapons to Ukraine, sanctions, internal pressure, elite conflict, all possible tools should be used. But on the other side, of course, when European governments say, okay, our resources are limited, and we have more empathy for Ukrainians who had to leave, whose houses are destroyed, and so on and so on. So we want to help them first, and then think about those young Russian draft daughters. It's also, well, explainable. So, and this makes it such a complicated question, so we also have a debate on it. And when like Latvian or Estonian government says, okay, we are small countries, we just can't accept hundreds of thousands of young Russians, that's also like explainable and understandable. Well, I believe that Europe has to find way to deal with them now that many of them like left for Kazakhstan or Georgia or other countries. Probably like the due process should be developed to grant them asylum, humanitarian visas, and so on. Hopefully, countries like Germany will follow suit and will develop such a process.
We have back here. Oh, you've got the mic. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for everything you've done. Amazing, amazing, amazing. I think this question is more for Maria. At some point, I remember when either Alexei was taken to Germany or he went to prison, you specifically, Georgy Volkov, sort of stepped into his shoes on the show. And you know, clearly, Alexei has this like super magnetic personality. It's like even when he goes on TV, you're like, wow, this guy is cool. Like I just like listening to him. And how did it feel to like step into his shoes? How did you adapt to that role? I guess Yulia Sobol as well. So curious to hear like how that all worked.
Well, I didn't do it voluntarily. I remind you the context. I was accused by Russian propaganda in poisoning Navalny. So it was either me stepping up and actually saying that, right, okay, guys, we did do it. Like, that's what happened. FSB did it. You know that. This is a chemist, Kudravtsev from FSB. Look, he's confessing that wasn't me. So that took some time, and it's not like when you don't have. I almost didn't have a choice, right? The circumstances that caused my publicity were very extreme, and in extreme circumstances, you just try to do your best. What else could we do? He's in prison. He's not capable for hopefully not for a long time, but still not capable of making videos, right? Navalny. So someone has to do it. Why would we stop doing it, right? Wouldn't it be the best present to Vladimir Putin? Putin will be so happy if we stopped. It would ultimately just make his dream come true, you know, and prove this formula that if you imprison Navalny, the work will stop. So we didn't merely feel the shoes, like let's be realistic. Neither me nor Georgy are comparably good to Navalny, but we're still doing something in the same domain, and we are holding the seat warm for that wonderful day that I'm sure will come, where Alexei will come in and say, off you go, and we will go back in our dark investigative room, where we spent previous 10 years just buried under piles of paper and other wonderful stuff. I'm waiting for that day to come back to my happy place, because this is where my happy place is.
Mike, over here.
Guys, thanks a lot for your work, and thanks for just now voicing your support to those young Russian army dodgers. Just 2 weeks ago, I got my повестка, my draft notice. But my question actually builds up on the first question about the investigations that you guys are doing. I know you have a list of 6,000. So actually, two-sided question. One is, how many out of those that you put on the list are actually sanctioned? Also, how wide are those sanctions? Is it only the EU or is it worldwide? And then the second part of the question is, how effective is that in actually fighting the regime?
Thank you so much. So the question is referring to the so-called ACF 6000 list, the Anti-Corruption Foundation's list of 6,000, now actually almost 7,000 individuals close to Vladimir Putin, whom we suggest Western countries to designate for individual sanctions, which include travel ban and assets freeze. As of now, about 1,200 of them are sanctioned in the US, comparable amount in the EU, the European Union, slightly less in UK, about the same amount in Canada, and some in Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and some other jurisdictions who do sanctions. Many jurisdictions don't do any sanctions, and actually that's not good. We not only want them sanctioned in the Western countries, but it would be actually very nice to have some sanctions in Dubai, in Israel, in Singapore, or elsewhere. It would be very helpful. Because, well, what they are doing now is they're actually moving their assets to those jurisdictions. How efficient it is and how efficient it could be much better. Like, well, what was the latest reaction of European Union to the illegal annexations of 4 regions of Ukraine? 30 individuals designated for individual sanctions. That's nothing. Our approach that we advocate for is not only the much longer list of names, that's one part of the story, but also a clear pathway out of the sanctions for them. That's the idea. Sanction much more of them, many thousand, 10,000, all government officials of all levels, but also tell them how they can walk away by leaving their government jobs, condemning the war, breaking away from Putin, telling the truth, and so on and so on. This would be much more efficient than the current slow step-by-step approach. Because now, unfortunately, the only way for an individual who has been designated for sanction to leave the sanction list is to die. Well, Zhirinovsky was smart enough, a few other guys, but not everyone on the list is so smart. So, and they don't know the way out, and this only kind of like pushes them towards Putin. They feel more in the same boat, nowhere to leave, nowhere to run, like more consolidated. That's not wise. The ultimate goal is not to sanction those guys. We despise them, they deserve to be. But the ultimate goal is to defeat Putin and to stop the war. So, in order to achieve this goal, we have to go much wider with the sanctions, but to use them as a leverage to actually, like, to split the elites.
One here who's got a microphone, and then we're going to go to the lady in the back and the gentleman there. We've got about 10 more minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. I think your work is incredibly outstanding to bring the bright day of the bright future of Russia closer. And my question, what gives you an optimism to continue what you're doing despite all the obstacles and danger? Is there any feedback, any measurable results that you actually see some change because of your investigation? Not necessarily physical, but in the minds of people. What makes you believe in your incredible work?
I don't know what makes you believe that tomorrow the sun raises and then eventually it will go down. I'm just convinced, and I will fight anybody who will tell me that I'm wrong. I am convinced that Russia can be a normal, democratic, liberal country where people are, I wouldn't go as far as saying rich, but well off, where people aren't, where elderly people aren't below the poverty line, where foreign policy isn't embarrassing. You ask me, is it possible, is it possible Russia without chemical weapons? Russia, a president that doesn't kill his opponents with Novichok? Yes, it's possible, and I really believe that. It's a very, very simple thought. So that convictions, combined with what you've seen just now, that's my boss, that he was talking there. He said, don't be inactive, don't give up, and if they are applying pressure on you, that means that they're scared of you. So I have a very clear instruction from my boss, and I'm following that very much.
For one moment, because I don't think you've told how many people have seen Putin's palace inside Russia. The YouTube video, I understand there's a figure of the number of Russians who have watched that video, just to give you a sense of the impact of the work they're doing.
Leonid just helped me with the math, and now I can tell that it's around 90 million people in Russia who watched it.
And what's the population of Russia? 140, 90 million people in Russia have seen their work. Okay, so we've got a few more. We've got a couple over here and a couple over there and one here. So the gentleman's got his hand up. Do you have a microphone?
I
You do now.
Here.
And I'm sorry, oh, she's first. And then you.
Yes, thank you so much. The war in Ukraine has been going on for months, and there is no end in sight. As the leader of the opposition, do you know what would Mr. Navalny's position be on ending the war? Because in the West, we start talking about sitting down with President Putin and negotiating. Do you think he would? Well, how would he stop this war? Would he agree to negotiate with Putin?
That doesn't make no sense. Doesn't make any sense to negotiate with Putin. That's I believe like everything that we've done proves that it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, you can negotiate with someone who, I mean, you don't want to negotiate just for spend time talking. You want to come up with some kind of agreement. But you don't, there is no sense to negotiate with someone who doesn't respect their signature under the agreement. And everything we know about Putin is that like any obligation he would take, he would have no respect to. Like Russia is a founding member of the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Not only a signatory of convention, but the founding member. Russia used to be a member of European Court of Human Rights and a member of European Convention on Human Rights, and so on and so on. And I mean, the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, the Minsk agreements, whatever. So I mean, it's Albert Einstein said it's such a stupid thing to repeat doing the same and to expect a different outcome. So, and that's about negotiating with Putin.
So we have a couple of hands over here.
Hi. You guys doing a great job. We're in New York, and one of your investigations was right here. And I remember Alexei himself walking on the streets of Tribeca, I believe, when you found, not Tribeca, you found apartments of Valery Gergiev, and you got his signature to prove that those were his. And my question is, did that yield any results? Did you get them arrested, those apartments, or that was just like you showed the video and nothing happened after that? And Peskov, for example, everybody knows about his property in Miami, the Porsche Tower, the penthouse.
I don't.
Everybody knows. You go to Miami, they'll show you. I've been there actually. Everybody knows that this is his, and his not and his wife's. Yeah. But did you get some results in the U.S.? I know you got some in Europe, but in the U.S., did something tangible happen here?
I don't think that Gergiev was sanctioned in the U.S. I know that he's in the long list in the EU. And
he's not yet.
I don't think anything has been done in the US because we didn't really concentrate on the US. There is just one penthouse here, whereas he owns half of Italy. We prioritized. But I am just preempting a question that we're gonna get within the next 5 minutes, asking, but Maria, Leonid, but what can we do to help? Is there any way we can support your work? You know, this thing. That's a brilliant and great way to do it. Many of you, most of you presumably are American citizens. You have your representatives. Your government institutions actually work, and there is someone sitting there representing you. And how about you go and ask this question not at our speech here, but directed to your congressman
That's how we get like Lavrov's mistress's daughter apartment arrested in London. Just people came out on the street like Russian immigrants and local people in London just like protested in front of her apartment.
And then MP from South Kensington joined, and he tweeted something, and then another MP from a neighbouring borough also tweeted something, and then a week later, Lavrov's secret apartment in London was arrested. So it works, and I'm pretty sure it can work here too. And we have the list of targets, and we would appreciate any help.
Use political tools. We in Russia domestically we can't use them, so Putin kind of like destroys the political field. But here, like talk to your representatives.
But you have all the evidence. You're going to send it over. Okay, so we have.
Well, you clearly have the evidence about Peskov in Miami.
We're going to take 3 more questions. One here, one there, one there.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you for your sacrifices, and I wanted to ask a question, like with all due respect to all the work you're doing. I want to know why there was a slight discrepancy, it seems, between what Mr. Navalny has said about Crimea, not necessarily saying that it belongs to Ukraine, versus I saw that Mr. Volkov said that it's undeniably Ukrainian. So I'd like to know, like, why is there a difference, and also if Mr. Navalny were to become the leader of Russia, do you think that would give back Georgian territories, and on what basis?
But there is no difference, and never was. Navalny condemned the annexation of Crimea on the very first day when Crimea was annexed. He always stressed that the annexation of Crimea was illegal, and that it is not only the crime against Ukraine, but also that it's Putin's crimes against Russia, against the interests of Russia, which Putin actually pledged to protect, because it led to sanctions, to international isolation, and so on. If you are referring to this infamous sandwich quote of autumn 2014, that was a very sober assessment of political situation, because actually, Navalny was absolutely correct. If not the war of 2022, if the situation would remain stable, it would be the political reality for the next 20 years or for the next generations, like Northern Cyprus or many other like frozen conflicts. It would remain a frozen conflict for generations. Putin destroyed this equilibrium, and now, of course, especially after this sham referenda, when he gave this like 4 next territories, 4 next regions, exactly the same legal status as Crimea used to have. Now the question of bringing like Russia and Ukraine to international recognized borders, bringing Crimea back to Ukraine, is not an issue anymore. Like, of course, after the war will end, and after the war will end with Putin's defeat, all these regions will go back to Ukraine, and it's now possible. It's now politically possible, and we see a very clear path to this to happen. So I don't see any difference here, and I don't see any problems here. As for Georgian territories, luckily they were not annexed, so the situation is even simpler.
You talked about the day that you hope for, and we all hope for, when Alexei Navalny will come back and send you to your basement, but come back and lead the organization and be free in Russia. Can you talk us through the scenario that you must have gone through in your heads as to how that happens? It's very hard for us here to understand how that will unfold, and I would love to just hear one scenario is how that would unfold in your idea.
Well, the truth is that I'll give you also, you want to give you a scenario. The truth is that we of course also don't know, but well, I would put it this way: before February 24th, 2022, unfortunately, like the most viable scenario was just like more 15 or 20 more years of slow decline, stagnation, degradation of Russia and so on. But Putin was strong enough to hold the power until he does. I don't know, like Franco in Spain or something like this, for 20 more years, for 15 more years, as long as his physical health would allow him. With all the repression machine in place, it was possible. But Putin destroyed the balance of powers that he's carefully built in the previous 20 years. So now we don't see how is this possible. Whatever the outcome, doesn't matter. We don't know how long the war will last. But Putin destroyed his own system entirely. There are now so many conflicts among members of Russian elite, so many public conflicts that I don't see how it would be possible for Putin actually to regain control of the system. Now he's clearly losing it. So in my opinion, the most viable scenario is he will be removed because of this or that form of an elite conflict.
The only thing that I have to add is just my personal recommendation, probably to those who study Russia, and I would imagine there are plenty of those people in the room right now. Don't waste your time trying to assign probabilities in a chaotic system. If we were forecasting who the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom we're going to... Alright, I mean, we can... well, I can tell you right now, and tomorrow it's going to happen. But in any case, we can maybe spend some time speculating, making assumptions, and some of them would make sense. Same applies to other predictable jurisdictions, predictable places with working institutions. When you're trying to make a scientific assessment in a system which isn't scientific by definition, in a system that plays against you, in the system that is not acting rationally, and Putin is not acting rationally, it's a bit of a waste of time. I understand the pleasure one can derive from imagining this day, and we can all entertain ourselves with that. Trust me, my imagination also goes to that direction and very far in that direction. He can be removed by a palace coup, or he can choke on a porridge tomorrow morning. The outcome will be the same, and our job is actually to just be prepared and come to that day in our best shape, physically, mentally, organization-wise, and that's literally what the ultimate mission of our work right now.
But one little thing to add, and to finish on a positive and an optimistic note, is that however it comes to an end, and whenever it happens, one thing we can be absolutely sure about: there will be no next Putin after Putin, and it can't be worse after Putin. His system is an autocracy. It's uninheritable. There is no such thing as a successor, and it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's by design. So at the moment Putin appoints a successor, he becomes a lame duck. So and everyone would lick the shoes of the successor, not of Putin's. And so he intentionally doesn't do this. He runs only on maintaining balance between 10 or 20 of his main lieutenants who hate each other and will start fighting against each other in the moment when Putin is taken by the elites. And we, as Maria said, we have to be prepared to this very moment, because we are actually younger, angrier, and better prepared to this fight. We have our organization in place, we have the grassroots movements, large grassroots movements, and when they will be fighting against each other before Putin's corpse is buried, we will be able to start our fight for democratic and peaceful transition.
More questions. If you didn't have a chance to ask now, I know you'll be here for a few more minutes. You could come up and speak with Leonid and Maria. But I go back to what John Train's initial conception of this prize is: steadfast resistance to evil at great personal risk. Alexei Navalny is the embodiment of that, and these two individuals are pretty close as well. Yeah.